Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Patrick Saul, and I'm the East Asia correspondent for the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung. But you didn't come for me, you came for the man sitting next to me. Most of you know him already, Michael Cucek. He's been in Japan for 20 years as a political analyst, and he will talk today a bit about what next year's gonna bring us politics-wise. And if you know how good his crystal ball is, you know you can just go home, write everything up, and you can go on a long holiday after that. That's actually why I allowed him to talk a little bit longer than usual. He's going to talk about 30 minutes. I also have the hope that because he's not a politician, he will actually stick to our agreement. And you will still have time for question and answers. And he already said if you have questions later on, you can email him or call him later on. So without further ado, Mr. Cucek, please.
Okay. Yeah, most of the persons who come up and sit here at this dais are either newsmakers or if they're academics, they're here to flog their latest book. I'm not here to do either. I'm not a newsmaker, obviously, and I don't have a book to flog, though I would like to point out some books that have appeared in the last year that will really help frame this upcoming election in 2016. And I'll try to get the names in, and if you don't get who the authors are immediately, that's fine. You can email me later about it. Particularly, this upcoming House of Councilors election looks like it's going to be the last hurrah of Ozawa Ichiro. Now, it's strange to start off with him, but I would really recommend Aurelia George Mulligan's biography of him that appeared earlier this year that really sets down how much he has done for this country and how important he is and how sad it is that he's going into eclipse. At least the first chapters before you get to the scandals and the courtroom battles. So in her biography of his life. In terms of the effect of the coalition, I would recommend Stephen Reed, Axel Klein, and George Erdhardt's book on the Komeito, which appeared late last year, but most people probably still haven't looked at. That book is a fabulous introduction to what has been, up until now, a very mysterious party, at least for persons overseas. And for various topics, there are certain authors you should be reading. If you're writing about Japan's security policy and how it might affect the election, the persons to read are Giulio Pugliese and Reinhard Drifter. And again, the names will be later. If you're going to be talking about Japan's maritime security issues, that would be Alessio Patalano or Alexis Dudden. In terms of the issues having to do with Abenomics, Richard Katz. Mr. Katz actually appears here, but the other persons I have mentioned probably haven't. So I don't have a book to flog, but I'd love to flog other people's books, and I have a few more titles at the end. What I do want to talk about today are three basic subjects. Is the House of Councilors election next year, the recent LDP non-election, the cabinet reshuffle, and the new three arrows. What happens to Abe, what happens to Japan. Basically, when the founders of this country, well, the people who were writing the Constitution the second time during the occupation got around to thinking about the House of Councilors, they didn't think that it was going to be a big deal. But it turns out to be a very big deal indeed, because it can halt the actions of the House of Representatives. And so, while this upper house is nominally less powerful than the lower house, it is where political action happens, or it has happened. And that's where the political action is going to happen in 2016. And that's why this election is crucial. Yes, the current ruling coalition has over a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives, meaning that they can override anything that the House of Councilors does. And yes, the LDP is in a wonderful position to retain its control of the upper house. And in fact, the story of this upper house election coming up is whether or not the Democrats can hold on by their fingernails to what few seats they have left. This is going to be a historic election in that for the first time, there are going to be combined electoral districts. Until now, the electoral districts have been purely based upon the prefectures, the first election being the exception. But with this change that has been mandated by the Supreme Court, there are going to be electoral districts which are based in two different prefectures. Not only that, there are going to be some prefectures that are losing out in this election and some prefectures that are gaining. The system is called 10 up and 10 down, and in this case, Hokkaido, Tokyo, Aichi, Hyogo, and Fukuoka prefectures are on the up. They're going to gain seats in the district elections, whereas Miyagi, Niigata, and Nagano are losing seats, and then Shimane and Tottori and Tokushima and Kochi are actually being combined into single electoral districts and are losing, are going from 4 senators to 2 in the district elections. Now, the disparity under this unusual blended system is going to fall below the Supreme Court's mandated 3.0 level, but just barely at 2.97. And it may already, due to population shifts, be over. But this was mandated by the Supreme Court saying that 3.0 is too big. So 2.97 was the one that was determined. This is also going to be an historic election in that the franchise is changing for the first time in 70 years. The last time the franchise changed was when women were allowed to vote. In this upcoming election, teenagers, 18 and 19 years of age, will be voting in a national election for the first time. Now, high school students have voted in the past, and indeed, in local elections, even middle school students, based on the concept that you can live apart from your family and set up your own household at age 15. So it's not the first time ever that 18 and 19-year-olds will be voting, but it is the first time that they will be voting in a national election. Now, this will add 2.4 million new voters to the voting rolls, which sounds really great. Unfortunately, as you probably know, the young in Japan tend to vote at a very low rate, and I'll show you how low that is. It's very difficult to understand, considering that the rest of the rules involving majority stay as they were. For example, alcohol and other activities. You cannot, partake in alcohol until you're 20 years of age, but you can vote at 18. There are all kinds of differences here that have not yet been worked out. For me, this has never been about increasing the suffrage, even though there are 2.4 million new voters. Indeed, I've always seen this as a back door to trying minors as adults. And it was very difficult for the opposition parties to oppose increasing the franchise, and they didn't, so that there was no opposition versus majority split when the vote came up on making the changes to the rules. But I think everyone is fairly aware that this is a backdoor. How do we know? Well, first of all, 18 and 19-year-olds participating in this election will be tried as adults should they violate election laws. They will not be protected by their minority status in other ways. This opens the door, I think, to eventually extending the prosecution capacity all the way to capital punishment to 18 and 19-year-olds. I think this is a first step. It's a roundabout step, but I think that's what the real goal is. And the members of the current administration have indeed expressed a great deal of interest, particularly in crimes within families of children killing their parents, has been something that they've been expressing distress about, and possibly having the possibility of the death penalty extended to 18-year-olds, I suppose in some people's minds, will preclude teenagers from killing their parents. Now, how effective will this increase in franchise be? It will be hard to say. This bottom blue line is, I know the numbers, you can't read them, is the voting rate for persons who are 20 to 29 years of age. In the last National House of Councilors election, the vote, only 32.57, less than a third of 20 to 29-year-olds voted. The voting rates that are above on this chart are the voting rates for persons of basically increasing age, so that senior citizens vote at a much higher rate in the 70s and in the 60s, whereas the youth do not vote. And while there may be a first-time excitement, we're not going to see this particular election as setting the youth on fire. If anything, it's very likely that in the aggregate, if you think about it, the contribution that the new voters will make to total voting rates will be negative, that they will actually drive the overall voting rate down. Now, in terms of what's going to happen in the election, these percentages are the responses to the NHK poll. What party do you support? The red line is the LDP. And as you see, it's been having a very, very nice year indeed. The yellow line is the main opposition party, the DPJ. Now, it has ending up the year pretty much where it started out, and it never at any point during the year really broke out even though at some times Mr. Abe and his party were having some difficulties, particularly during the August time, where you see on the red line numbers down to 34%. Still, when you compare 10% to 34%, a 3-to-1 margin, you're looking at a very difficult situation for the DPJ to survive in at least the proportional part of the vote. They are going to have a very difficult time competing with the LDP, and that it will not be helped if the Japan Innovation Party, now the Osaka Ishin no Kai, steals more opposition votes, anti-LDP votes, from the DPJ. So when they're asked, this is the most recent poll, who do you support? This is the way the vote is spread out. Now, the House of Councilors vote, as you all know, or at least most of you know, is divided into a proportional and a district vote. In the proportional vote, it is based on either a person's name that you write down or a party's name that you write down. Now, in this case, the LDP is enjoying basically a 4-to-1 advantage, which means that when the seats are parceled out according to the D'Hondt system, it will simply waltz away with the proportional vote, meaning that the DPJ, if it's going to save itself, has to save itself in the districts. So we're going to see a fight, basically, for the 59 seats of the DPJ, the seats that are left over from the JIP, and then some of the independents. The LDP is basically not playing defense. It's the DPJ. And that's something that's very important to understand about this election. Even though everyone knows that the DPJ is going in a losing position, and if they lose seats, it will go down as a loss, even though technically it's almost impossible for them to win or to gain seats against the mountain of support that the LDP has amassed. This is a chart. Again, it's very complicated, but it's very simple in terms of the bold line at the top with the DPJ. The DPJ is defending 26 district seats and 15 proportional seats in this election. Now, the last time we had an election in 2013, they walked away from the carnage with only 7 proportional seats and 10 district seats. This yellow section for the DPJ is the last area where they have a good block of seats. Otherwise, they're a marginal party. If everything goes well for them, based on the current polling, they will end up with approximately the same number of proportional seats. Where they have to save themselves is in those 26 district seats. They are going to have to fight it out, one individual against one individual. And that's hard. In terms especially of voting rates. The voting rate under the Abe era, the second Abe era, has been plummeting. And the DPJ lives on the unaligned voter. Well, the unaligned voter is not voting right now and has not been voting for the past 3 elections. The unaligned voter has been walking away. We have had since, these are the last 2 House of Councilors elections, they are not to the historical lows that were achieved in the 1990s, those very low numbers of 50% and 44%. That drop and dip was when the House of Councilors was full of retired wrestlers, ex-actors, comedians, and it was a joke body. It is not a joke body anymore. It's very serious, and it is very important to the control of the government. That's why voting rates have gone up, but they're still on a downward trend. And since Abe has become prime minister in the House of Representatives elections, we are hitting historical lows. So who are showing up? The LDP base, the Komeito base, and the Communist Party base, and people who are attracted to the Communist Party message. Those 3 parties have done very well. They did very well in the last House of Representatives election. They will do very well in the House of Councilors election. If they do very well in the House of Councilors election, the DPJ gets smashed. Now, in terms of Abe, we had in the fall, we were supposed to have an LDP election. And it didn't happen for various reasons, basically because Noda Seiko, who was trying to run against Abe for the presidency, couldn't get 20 people in the LDP to sign up and say, I support you. She got 19, a very, very suspicious number. It's close enough so that she doesn't get embarrassed for not reaching 20, but it's not enough for 20. And knowing this country and knowing the way things are done here, that result of 19 persons saying yes was probably engineered so as to create not only an atmosphere that she was not a complete loser, but also that there is the semblance of a democratic process going on within the LDP. As you can see in terms of their in terms of their ages, in terms of their numbers of elections, they're very, very similar. So she is a serious candidate. She was not put up as a joke. They match up very closely. And she's a little better educated at Sophia University, a university I taught at this year. So I have some put in that in for us there. And I have a little asterisk next to her as the 2nd generation. She's really a 3rd generation, but her father did not run in the seat. So the seat was passed from her grandfather to herself. And that's an issue in terms of LDP politics. After the non-election did not happen, there was a cabinet reshuffle, and there has been some talk about how the Kishida faction got stiffed. Well, the Kishida faction was very much rewarded in the first cabinet, so it's not surprising that it got shaved in the second one. But the Hosoda faction, the faction to which nominally the Abe himself belongs, and which is the largest faction, received the lion's share of the positions that were available, with 5, which includes PM Abe among the members of the cabinet. The other factions, it was apportioned very much according to power. Now, the Aso faction and the Santo faction are merging, so they are going to leap ahead of the Kishida faction in terms of size. That's the basic agreement. When it happens, I'm not sure, but that's been agreed. And the Santo faction is unusual in that it's led by a woman. That's rather a new phenomenon, but it's going to be a very long-lasting one. Some very important people got moved up in the fall. Most important are these 2 gentlemen, very close advisors to the prime minister, very much always one of those guys who's hanging around in the background whenever you see him on television, Kato Kotsunobu and Hagiuda Koichi. Both of them moved up in the world, and Kato is in fact now in charge of the new 3 arrows. as the state minister for promoting dynamic engagement of all citizens, which is not what it's called in Japanese. And if you want to know what it's called in Japanese and the significance of that, I have an article in this month's Shinbun, #1 Shinbun, available at the counter at the Uketsuke, but you can also read it on the web, why that name, that English language name is facetious and misleading, and what the Japanese name means. But, so there's a little plug for my own stuff. And Mr. Hagiuda is very famous for being the man who always goes to Yasukuni instead of Abe, bringing his gifts, bringing his monetary contributions on the August 15th anniversary. He's the body man, he's the bag man, and he's been moved up in the world. Ishiba Shirga and Taro Kono, Abe's two main critics and two main opponents, have been retained or moved into the cabinet so that he is protected on that flank. He has them close by, so as they say in the old saying, have your enemies close by. You know, you have your friends close and your enemies even closer. He has them close by. And as members of the cabinet, they really can't play the roles that they were playing when they were not in the cabinet. Particularly Kono Taro. He has, however, used his position as state minister in charge of administrative reform to surreptitiously continue the anti-nuclear campaign that made him so famous, at least among people here. People who did not move, Seiko Hiroshige and Inada Tomomi. Now, Inada, many of you know, has been touted, or was being touted all of last year as Abe's dream replacement, the person that Abe wants to have take over. That talk has died out completely ever since she was not incepted into the cabinet. Instead, she was left in her position as LDP Policy Research Council chair. In fact, the entire leadership structure of the LDP stayed the same, which was a very unusual move by Abe, well this far into his administration, that he just didn't touch it. And everybody was reappointed. These people actually talk about more in depth, but in question and answer, but Noda Takeshi was replaced by Miyazawa Yoichi. See, that's the old prime minister, is Miyazawa Kiichi, who is related. Miyazawa Yoichi, and Funada Harijime was replaced by Mori Eisuke, both ostensibly for major gaffes. In the case of Noda Takeshi, for the bizarre Ministry of Finance plan to use the My Number system to give you a tax refund on food, is a part of the two-step raising of the consumption tax. And then Funada Hajime for exploding the security legislation debate by mistakenly inviting a Waseda professor. I also teach at Waseda right now. And that Waseda professor said, when he was asked, well, what do you think about what the government is doing? Is it constitutional or not? He said, well, it's unconstitutional. The debate that otherwise was supposed to die did not die, and was deeply damaging, as we saw in the poll numbers in July and August, to the Abe administration. Finally, I'd like to talk about the new three arrows. I'm not an economics person, and someone like Richard Katz can really tear this apart, the 600 trillion number. I won't go after it, but I would like to look at the 1.8 births per woman and the promise to have 0 people leaving the workforce to care for elderly relatives. Basically, this is the graph. This is available quite easily from the Ministry of Health, which shows the number of births per woman. The goal is to have 1.8 births per woman by the year 2020. The last time that happened was in 1984, and the last time it happened consistently was in 1978. So you're going to have to go either one of two ways. Either you're going to reestablish the entire social system of the 1970s, a father going to work and a mother staying at home, and the entire social and sexual relationship that existed at that time, or you're going to have to establish a brand new social and sexual relationship in the country if you want to get back to 1.8. Now, if you look at this graph I can go with it over with the people later. It shows at the bottom by age cohort. What happens is that if you look, there's these downward sloping curves and then some upward sloping ones. The downward sloping curves are women in their 20s. Women in their 20s are having fewer and fewer children, whereas women in their 30s, or especially that bottom big thick line with the dotted line, is women 35 to 39. They have been taking up the slack. The numbers would be much, much lower if they were having babies at the same rate as they were in the past. Women in their 30s have actually contributed a tremendous growth to counteract, to some extent, the loss of women in their 20s. Now, that's due to one thing: marriage is later. And currently, the age of first marriage is 31 years of age for men and 30 years for women, basically. Now, if you can do one of three things. One, you can end the stigma of out-of-wedlock births. That's the way they do it in France. That's the way they do it in the US. That's the way they have higher birth rates. You know, if you're not married and have kids, it's okay. I don't see that happening, especially with a conservative like Abe Shinzo in charge of the government. So that's out. Currently, only about 2% of births are out of wedlock, whereas in the United States, 40% are out of wedlock. Okay, the second thing is to convince Japanese couples to get married earlier. Good luck with that. It's been since 1950, it's only gone up. So good luck with that. And the other one is to, of course, improve fertility dramatically for women ages 35 and up. Again, a technological challenge, which for Japan is actually something that they might want to do. In terms of the third arrow, let's be real. The last time that the government even bothered to check how many people were leaving the workforce was in 2012. There are no figures after this, which is very strange, I think. We have no figures for 2013, 2014 yet. The last number they have is 101,000 people leaving officially to take care of elderly relatives. And that is based on the top of that population pyramid that's there. What this section of people, these are the people who are in their 60s and 70s now. They are, in fact, most of them, the caregivers of the elderly, very elderly parents that they have. When these people go from caregiver to caretaker, to someone who needs to be cared for, we're talking 100,000 people leaving the workforce per year will seem like a dream. So the Abe administration has set up, basically, economically and in terms of social policy, impossible to meet goals in an election year. Now you're saying, okay, well, it's just electoral politics. Who cares? After 2016 July, they'll dump the whole thing. It's only just for promotional purposes. Okay, that's possible. But this is an international environment. How are international investors supposed to look at Japan when this is the government program? And if you want to know what the government program looks like on a single slide, this is the slide. This explains the government's three arrows. This is what was given to us by the Kante to explain how this all works, including my favorite, dream-weaving child care supports. That's the slide, and if you want it, you can get it off the web. This is not a great copy of it, but this is supposed to explain to you in simple terms so you can understand how this all fits. Now, is this just a game? Well, no. I cannot, I may be mocking the Prime Minister's plans in terms of the three arrows, but in terms of what's going on in terms of the debate over whether or not to have a special set of rates for food in Japan consumption tax rates is a very serious political gamble by the Prime Minister, and perhaps for a reason that you don't know about. This is a map that came in my Sunday supplement to the Tokyo Shimbun, and thank you to the FCCJ for giving them a lovely award for their journalism. They've become even more feisty after receiving the FCCJ's award. So if you were wondering whether that award had an effect, well, as a reader, as a consumer, they're even meaner toward the administration than they were before. So congratulations on that. But this is a map of dependency on pensions in terms of income. The dark blue is Tokyo, and it is not very dependent in terms of personal income. It is, in fact, the least dependent place in terms of personal income on the pensions. And the tax rise that is supposed to be happening in the consumption tax is to pay, basically, for strengthening the pension system. So if you're playing with the tax rise, you are playing with the way that this situation is supposed to be remediated and ameliorated. And it's particularly significant in the rural areas. Here's Tottori Shimane, and here's Kochi, Tokushima, the places that are being merged. You definitely don't want them to have voting strength, because those places live on more than 20% of personal income is purely from pensions. Okay? Just pensions, not personal savings. We're not talking about all the other things that people do in order to have an income to live on. Just the pension system. If you're playing with it, therefore, these red areas, all these red prefectures, are places where you're going to be in danger. And it's a serious problem. This is, again, from that same Sunday supplement in the Tokyo Shimbun. If you're talking not about income, but about consumption, that over 30% of all consumption in Shimane Prefecture is paid for entirely out of pension money. Right now, before all those baby boomers start retiring and leaving the workforce, already 30% of consumption is paid for out of pension money, not out of savings, not out of income, not out of investment income, not out of whatever, just pensions. In Tokyo, the reason why you don't feel this, that the pension issue is so important to the voters, in Tokyo, it's 1/3 of that. That's that little tiny thing at the end there. Of course, this is a funky graph that's been manipulated so as to make the differences much larger than they appear. But nevertheless, where we are, we cannot sense to the extent to which pensions and stability of the pensions are important. And if you look at monthly surveys, going back as far as you want to look, always when people are asked, what is the thing that the government should attack first? Always, okay, during some period of time it's economic growth, but most of the time it's stabilizing the pension system. This is the graph of why. And this is the map of why. Well, if the map will come back. That's the map of why. And that's why this debate in this election year is a really big political gamble, and a much bigger political gamble than people say. Some people say, my friend Okamura Jun, whom you know, many of you know, great analyst, says it's a cheap way of getting new Komeito votes. The new Komeito wants the special 8% rate, and if you can give them that special 8% rate on consumption tax, you get all of their voting in the House of Councilors election. It's a cheap switch. Yes, but also you are also playing with fire, is my point. And I'm going to stop there. I would like to say where Abe is. Well, I have 33 minutes. I'm way over my budget. Abe is becoming a historical figure. He has 1,451 days under his belt. That puts him really close to Hayato Ikeda, who he'll be passing around in June. He's going to become, very clearly, a person of tremendous historical importance. Now, this for me was personally, I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible, is really stunning because I taught a course at Sophia University this year on political leadership. And all through the course, all the different authors, historical, the traditional criteria of leadership, none of them applied to Abe Shinzo. I kept trying to write in my head an article showing how Abe Shinzo is a great leader in Japanese history, and they just didn't match up. It's because I think Abe Shinzo is not a leader, and many of Japan's top politicians are not leaders anymore. What they are, and I think in this election year we have to, as what journalists have to be careful, is the difference between leaders and what I call rulers. These are the rulers of Japan. And Abe has done very well in historical terms, in terms of his popularity. That beautiful red line is him. The line above him in blue is Koizumi. Koizumi was a leader. He was charismatic. He got people to change their minds. Abe does not ever change anyone's mind. If you watch every debate, the numbers go down for every policy that Abe talks about. The numbers go down over time. The more he talks about it, the less people like it. Koizumi was the exact opposite. We're not talking about a leader here. In terms of, there is a bizarre situation involving policy. Here, the cabinet support levels are 47%. This is the latest Sankei poll. But in terms of on a per policy basis, the cabinet is always more popular than any of its policies, which I call the Abe paradox. Abe himself and his cabinet are more popular than anything they do. But that's impossible. They must do something that makes people happy. No. And in terms of social policy, you're already with 62% of people think that are not supporting. This is a Sankei poll too. This is not an Asahi poll indicating they're talking only to people who are anti-Abe. This is a Sankei poll. Okay? So, where does Abe fit in all of this, and who could possibly replace him? And if you're wondering who these people are, I'll go into it later, but this is the number of elections they have to the Diet, and 8 seems to be the right one to replace it, and the number one person in the position up there in the top left is Foreign Minister Kishida. But don't forget to look at the other guy with 8 elections, which is Motegi Toshimitsu. He's over on the other side, and he is the head of Diet relations for the LDP. A last thing, and this is for Joe. This is basically for laughs only. But still, when I say rulers, what do I mean? Everyone is pretty much familiar with this set. Okay, you're the prime ministers since Kishi, the grandfather of the current prime minister. If you were to ask, okay, who amongst you has either had a father or a grandfather as prime minister? These folks have. It's become prerequisite, at least for LDP. The two that in that last row who don't have it are Khan and Noda, who are common citizens. But you are no longer talking about people who just walk up off the street and become leaders. These are people whose parents and grandparents were prime ministers. One. And there's a particular twist in terms of the LDP and its seniority system. The LDP does reward people for the number of times that they've been elected to the Diet. And if you ask this question, how old were you when your father died? You get these answers. Hashimoto was 25, Obuchi was 21, Koizumi was 27, Abe was 26. They had an immediate advantage. Obuchi had to cool his heels for a few years before he could run because the limit is 25. But all these others could immediately start building on their careers. So unless you are a part of this aristocracy, you are not in competition for the prime minister's post. Forget it. You're not going to happen. And Dad has to make the ultimate sacrifice. Sorry. And, oh yes, Mr. Ishiba, do you have something to say? How old were you when your father died? 24. Okay, his father was in the House of Councilors. It was not a House of Representatives switch, but still. And in the case of Seiko Noda, as I noted, father didn't have to die because he was never in the way in the first place. But if your father doesn't die, you're not part of this very, very tiny, tight-knit group who could be prime minister. And that's the difference between rulers and leaders. Rulers have attributes. Getting it backwards. Leaders have attributes, and they have circumstances that make them leaders. Rulers meet criteria. And Abe meets the criteria of a ruler of Japan, and that's who he is, and that's whom he will be. And I tell you, unless you figure out something else, resistance is futile. This is the slide I ended on 2 years ago in my speech at Temple University, Japan. It's still good today, and I bet if I make a speech next year, this will be the same slide I use at that time. Thank you very much.
Well, I think you just passed your exam to become a politician because you're 10 minutes over your time. But we forgive you because I don't think we have to stop exactly at 1:30. So please, we're going to questions and answers right away. And I know there's a working journalist sitting over at the far table. Please, Elaine.
Elaine Kurtenbach, Associated Press. This may be getting a little bit deep into domestic things, but I understand that there's a lot going on in the prefectures with regard to sort of this reorganization of how regional lines will be drawn as regions are consolidated. And I'm interested to know if that's going to have any impact on the bigger picture for the national level.
You're talking about the regional,
Yeah.
the plan to
There's a lot going
reorganize
on.
Japan outside of prefectures and into regions instead?
Well, apparently there's a lot of consolidation, of consolidation of prefectures, for example, and a lot going on at the local level in terms of developing new energy and other things. There seems to be a lot happening outside of Tokyo. Will this make any difference at the national level? That's what I'm trying to ask.
In terms of regionalism, the only regionalism that I see that really makes a difference is the regional arrogance and regional chauvinism that has been tapped into by Hashimoto Toru and his Osaka Ishin no Kai. Now, there's no reason why Osaka should not feel really resentful of both Tokyo and the rest of the country. Osaka is the only region that has not produced a prime minister in the post-war era. Even Hokkaido, if you consider Hatoyama to be really from Hokkaido, has produced a prime minister. But Osaka has never produced anything. The Kansai region is seriously underrepresented in terms of its power. And if the Osaka Ishin no Kai does go forward as it seems to be doing, it won all three of its elections just the other day. If it goes forward, it's going to make life very hard for the DPJ, because the DPJ will not be, therefore, competitive with the LDP in a big region of the country, which means that there will be a big hole in any plan that they may have to challenge the LDP at a later time, because there will be this blot of Osaka regionalism. Beyond that, in terms of regionalism, in terms of integration, I don't see much happening, because there is so much artificial, yes, but pride, real pride felt in terms of prefectural identity. It's going to be very difficult, and even these mergers that have happened in terms of the House of Councilors are over screams and yells. I don't see much happening beyond that. It's just not something, and what would happen, if we have mergers, what would happen to the national baseball tournament? We wouldn't have the teams set up the way they were, and everybody would feel really sad. So the prefectures are here to stay, I think.
Secret?
Siegfried Knittel, writing for the Austrian newspaper, Der Standard. You said the Abe cabinet is more popular than its policy. But was it not this also the case in the Koizumi cabinet? Koizumi, the Japanese people didn't was not interested in post-reform. They wanted to improve pension system and economic conditions, not a post-reform. So in this way, it was a similarity in this way to the Abe cabinet.
But what many people, I'll even send you the link to the Nikkei article of that time, called the Koizumi magic, where Koizumi Once he said, this is where we're going to go on this, that's the way the public opinion moved. In the case of postal reform, basically, when he called the election, public opinion was running basically 2-1 against postal reform. By the time the election came around, he had switched it over completely so that they were 2-1 for, over a space of just 2 months. Less than 2 months. A very short amount of time. And in issue after issue, he would take an issue that was, for most people, marginal or peripheral, and he would say, this is where I want to go. And people would follow him. The situation involving Abe has been the exact opposite. Every time he puts his marker on something, you can see in the polls constant decay over time. The more he and Suga-san, Kambo Chokan, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, talk about a subject, the lower and lower it goes in the polls. So that they have built into the system a cutoff point. They will not talk about something past a certain point because it will start really looking bad. So it's not like they can continue delaying action or delaying somehow on every issue because they are in fact eroding support. That's a big difference, I think.
Yes, please.
Tamsin Booth from The Economist. Michael, could you just run us through the double election stuff, whether that might be a possibility? And also, I'm just really curious to know what you think on the arithmetic on reaching 2/3 in the upper house and constitutional revision and all of that. And just, after the poll slump last year over security legislation, how soon do you think Abe can tackle constitutional revision, et cetera, et cetera? Thanks.
Okay. On the first issue of the double election, which everybody's begun talking about, the question is whether the Komeito wants it. Ostensibly, the Komeito does not want to have more than one election. And we have never had an election where the Komeito had a veto vote in terms of being called or not in a double election. So my guess is that there won't be one. That is not to say that the LDP doesn't have an absolutely fabulous interest in running it, basically because it's the way to impoverish all the opposition parties, make them run down their funds, particularly the DPJ, in a hopeless attempt to stay at the same place. Basically, looking at the polls the way they are, the LDP would gain as many seats as it has already in the House of Representatives, which would mean that it was all for naught for the DPJ, and they'd be fighting, of course, in a large number, 295. They won't put candidates in that many districts, but a large number of districts. All that will be for nothing, and they will have a tremendous blow to their prestige as well. The temptations, both in terms of making other people burn their money and embarrassing them, are huge. But I still think that the Komeito will still keep Abe from doing it. The other issue has to do with Abe's own longevity. He was re-elected to a 3-year term without opposition, with the support of all of the faction leaders. He has the time. He doesn't, unlike his predecessors, who all could only last a year, they really had to get things done, they really had to do something important. He can hold off. Now, what are the chances of getting 2/3 for the coalition with the Komeito? Very good. Very, very good that they'll walk away. Will that lead to constitutional revision? Probably. But it will start out not with Article 9, but with something that the Komeito wants, something like their environmental rights amendment that they want to put in. After that, the way will be set. The people will be used to having, they will have had their first referendum that they never participated in. The way will be set for revision of Article 9. But that's not the first thing that will happen, but are we looking at it? Yeah.
Yes, Jonathan.
Jonathan Sobel from the New York Times. I may have missed the first question, so if this is a repeat, I apologize. You can just ignore it. The idea of a united sort of liberal left opposition is a constant theme in Japanese politics. It seems to come together sometimes, then falls apart. There's been some new movement on that front the last few months, including the Communist Party maybe coming into play there and being more, a potential for cooperation there. What do you see as the potential or limitations on a more united opposition? And if it happens, how vulnerable do you think the LDP is to that, given that so much of this, of Abe's support seems to come from the, well, there's nobody else, so shikata ga nai camp?
Okay, on the last point, the question of nobody else, Abe is an historical prime minister, being the first one whose main support has been, when people are asked, why do you support the cabinet, where the main answer is, because we don't see anybody else. He's the first prime minister for that, for whom has relied upon that concept as legitimizing rule. In terms of putting together a liberal, so to speak, opposition, let's work it out first of all. Maehara Seiji is a loudmouth extremist, but he's not wrong. The purpose of the DPJ is to be the non-communist opposition to the LDP. If it joins hands with the communists, what's the purpose of the whole affair? And that's a very reasonable question, even though he shouldn't always, do his Hamlet routine of, am I leaving? Yes, I'm not. Yes, yeah, he does that. And that's really very bad for the party. But it's a very reasonable question. And secondly, what do you mean by liberal? I mean, you used to work for the FT, and so Abenomics is the most liberal economic program on earth among, at least along the OECD countries. What is more liberal than Abenomics? Where could they possibly go? There's only a tiny space between the communists and Abe for which the DPJ can stand on, and say, well, we're not as generous as the communists, and we're a little more generous than the LDP. No, there's no space for them to stand there. So in terms of what their policies would be, no, there is no liberal alternative. Where they're trying to make their stand is on issues of constitutionality. Will the Constitution written by the United States survive? The Abe administration couldn't give a hoot and has shown its contempt for the Constitution. But because that funny article in the Constitution that says that the Diet is the highest organ of government, the Diet calls the shots. And who calls the shots in the Diet? The LDP. And there's no way to get around that. The only person who ever found a way to get around that was Ozawa Ichiro. And how did he do it? By turning the DPJ into a mini-me LDP. Have all the elements of the LDP. Pander to the postmasters, pander to the truckers, whatever you need to get to win in the system that exists. And he got there, and he didn't do the first thing was destroy that system. He left it alone, and he went instead after the bureaucrats. God, what a mistake that was. And the people rightly don't see in the DPJ now anything that can rival that plan. Instead, they're going on constitutionality issues, and I just don't think that has the juice in order to really shake the machine that re-elects the LDP and its people.
Yes. Todd, please.
My name is Crowell. I'm with the Anadolu News Service in Turkey. I remember reading that all of the female members of the cabinet, not counting the former minister Obuchi, use their maiden names in seemingly in defiance of the law. How did they get away with it?
You are allowed, as a member of the government since 2001, you are allowed to use professionally your name. And in fact, there are persons who have been allowed, for example, Ogi Chiaki, when she was a minister, that's not her real name. That's her stage name. But she was allowed to use it as her name when she was, I forget what her ministerial position was, but she was there as the member of the coalition from the Liberal Party, because she was the head of the Liberal Party at that time. It's not something that has been unusual, and the pendulum swings both ways. I'm sure I don't recall Ren Ho, when she was leading the GRU, that she was required to use her husband's name. She went by Ren Ho, using her professional name. So it's not something that, at least legally, there's a problem with. Of course, there's a hypocrisy issue, being that the LDP and its Policy Research Council leader Inada Tomoe particularly were very happy with yesterday's Supreme Court ruling that required that at least there only be one surname. Now, that's something, nevertheless, that's going to come up in terms of legislation. Okay, there's going to be legislation, and it might even be promoted by the LDP in terms of mixed surnames. So, yes, there is a traditionalist issue, but also Abe himself has been pushing womenomics and women having more power and say over their lives and in business and in government, so that this issue of using one's name is going to be a constant issue, and it will actually be tearing the LDP apart. It's not going to be a partisan issue. I hope that answers your question in some way. Oh, by the way, in terms of yesterday's decision, the reason why they lost is because they made the wrong argument. They made the argument that having to change your surname diminishes you and therefore makes you unequal under the law. That was not the argument that they should have made. The argument they should have made is that fufubese already exists in Japan. Anyone who is married to a foreigner generally has a different surname, so that it is a legally recognized marriage, but the surnames are different. Fufubese already exists, should have been the argument. Why can't Japanese do it too? That was the argument they should have made. They did not make that argument. Not surprised, they lost their case. Okay.
Okay, Michael?
Michael Penn of the Shingetsu News Agency. First of all, it was a brilliant speech, and I have almost nothing that I could add after all that. But
I paid him to say that.
Yeah, you're supposed to be giving us predictions for 2016, and so I'm going to give you a very tough one. What's going to happen in Okinawa in 2016? Who's going to win that fight, and how's it going to go down?
The fight is going to end up with Okinawa losing. But it's going to be fought very gently. You have to think about it in terms of electoral politics. Does pushing hard on the Okinawan governor and on the Okinawan people lose Okinawa? Yes. That's why the LDP lost Okinawa in December of last year in terms of the House of Representatives election. That's why it lost the Nago election. That's why it lost the gubernatorial election. However, that's Okinawa. It's only one very small part of Japan. Does pushing hard on Okinawa lose votes outside of Okinawa? No. Basically, it has very little effect. And most people's thought is, well, better them than me. It's too bad for Okinawa, but it's better than coming here. That's one. And two, it buys Abe tremendous credibility in Washington. The harder and more steadily he pushes on Okinawa, the more he is committed to the Japan-U.S. alliance. It buys him a great deal of status. And, that there are persons in Washington who are paid in order to clap loudly every time Abe, pushes hard on the Okinawans, and those names shall remain nameless, and the nice awards that they get from the emperor at the awards ceremony, those people are going to, when they go and talk to their former colleagues inside the State Department, inside the Department of Defense, are going to talk up how tough Abe is and how determined he is to push Henoko. And that's all that Abe cares about, because then the United States is very glad to defend the Senkaku Islands.
Okay, we're technically out of time, but if you don't mind, we take one or two more questions. Is that okay?
I have no problem.
Okay, there's a question over there.
Thank you very much for coming. I think you were talking about foreign policy in terms of military, so my question is about this issue. What are the achievements of Abe in foreign policy, if any, and what are his basic setbacks in foreign policy also, especially for 2016? Thank you. Khaldoun Azari for Pan Orange News.
The achievement of the Abe administration, particularly under the National Security Advisor Yachi Shotaro, is this: get out of the rut of the big three relationships. The world is wide. There are lots of opportunities. You don't have to think every single day, every moment of the day, about what they're thinking in Beijing, Seoul, and in Washington. There are other capitals. There are many other countries in the world. Go to them too. And he introduced it as, I forget what the exact phrase, but it's a panoptical. Let's take a vast look at the entire globe, rather than focusing on these big three relationships and getting stuck in the rut of them. And that's exactly what Abe has done since he became prime minister. Seoul, his trip to visit to South Korea, was the 62nd country he visited. You are number 62 on my list. I've been to Jamaica before you. That is a work of genius, because it has taken the country out of its rut, which is to get obsessed about those three relationships. In the case of China and South Korea, the history issue. In the case of the United States, when is Japan going to do more for its own defense? Move outside to the rest of the world. Go to India. Go to Europe. Go to Africa. Go everywhere, and make close relations, personal relations, very strategic ones. He's close to Erdogan of Turkey. He's close to Putin. And then he goes to Washington and talks about having shared values. Brilliant! That's absolutely stunning that he can do both, and he does. And that, I think, is the achievement. What's going to happen in 2016? More of the same. Keep on moving out. Of course, he's going to run out of countries very soon. He's going to end up, on Montserrat. I don't know. There's a certain functional issue going on. But nevertheless, it's not just about China. We have to go wherever China goes. No, we just go. Let's not get stuck on the big three relationships. Let those develop as they do. And then eventually, what they call strategic patience, eventually they're going to call. And that's what's happened.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
If anybody has to leave and get to their next appointment, please do. Please don't be shy of standing up and exiting.
Makoto Honjo, associate. I think one of the big issues about Shinzo Abe is that there is this big dichotomy between his sort of inner leanings, shall I say, his very sort of nationalistic right-wing sort of leanings, and the policies he's advocating. And I'm wondering how long this sort of dichotomy can sort of rule until it sort of starts fighting with each other and collapse.
That's a really interesting question, and it's been the question that has pitted academics against each other in their assessment of Abe. The economists, for example, say he's a liberal. because his policies are liberal. And historians and social scientists say he's a diehard conservative, he's a member of Nippon Kaigi, and they start to paint all these dark shadows behind him. I see him as a politician. I don't see him in the same light. If you were here last year when I spoke, Toshikawa Takao predicted that in 2016 he'd become an osoroshi seijika, a terrifying politician. Well, he was reelected without any opposition against him. I guess maybe that, I haven't talked to Toshikawa-san. I don't know if that met the criteria of osoroshi. But I don't see him in that much a light. I see him as much more strategic. And what the breakdown will not be necessarily from the contradictions, but from the economic side not delivering, despite everything that has happened. That's where the breakdown will come. And unfortunately, it's the one breakdown none of us in this room wants to have happen. We're all in the same boat. We want Abenomics to succeed because we want this country, it's the last throw of the dice for this country. We want it to succeed. The only thing that will really shake Abe is it not succeeding, and that's bad news for all, not just for him.
Okay, back then, that's probably the last question as far as I can say. Please.
My name's Andy Joyce with MetLife. I'm just wondering about get your sense on the political dynamics around TPP, the ratification of TPP next year. How important is it to Abe that he gets that done? And to what extent will it likely become an issue that the opposition parties latch onto during the upper house elections in the summer? Thanks.
I'll try to answer it briefly. I'm not a trade specialist. The person to talk about that really would be Aurelia George Mulligan down in ANU. She would go through TPP very thoroughly. So would Mireia Solis at the Brookings Institution. She writes very much about it and is very knowledgeable. I would really defer to their opinions rather than my own. My only sense is that it doesn't have a lot of juice in terms of the outcome for the House of Councilors election. The overall view, I think, of Abe is that he's waiting for the farmers to die of old age. Even though he himself represents a rural district and has taken care of his people, that the whaling ship, mothership, and the fleet are home ported in his district. He makes sure they're taken care of. But as for other people in the primary industries, forestry, fishing, and farming, I don't think a child of Minami Azabu, gives a damn. That they're going to go. His real base is the Keidanren, Nippon Keidanren big business. They're the people who brought him back, not the rural, not the prefectural chapters. The prefectural chapters voted for Ishiba Shigeru in the first time that they ran in 2012. Ishiba Shigeru won in the first round based on the prefectural chapters. It was only inside the Diet when the second round came, which was only Diet members, that Abe then surpassed. I don't think he really gives a darn in terms of the only real opposition to TPP, which is the farming community.
Okay, I think that's the end of it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. And for Michael Thomas Cucek, I have a 1-year honorary membership. So we have a good chance to see him around here, and you can buy him a coffee and get some more information. And thank you everybody for coming. Thank you.